What are you doing around these cars?
Walking to mine.
Whose car?
Mine.
ID.
I'm a deputy U.S. Marshal. My credentials are in the inside pocket of this jacket.
Anybody can say they're federal.
That's why you check it.
Step away from the vehicle.
All right.
Turn around.
On what basis?
Suspicious activity. Walking to my own car.
Imagine the shock when a deputy throws handcuffs on a man who says he's a U.S. Marshal and then refuses to check the credentials that could confirm it in seconds. That's how this mess started. Outside a crowded restaurant in full view of bystanders, a routine contact turned into an illegal detention because one deputy decided his own ego mattered more than protocol. This wasn't confusion. It was defiance, and it put him on a direct path to federal trouble. Before we get into it, tell me where you're watching from, and if you follow stories about abuse of power getting exposed on camera, hit like and subscribe. A lot of these cases only get taken seriously once the footage starts moving. The man in cuffs was U.S. Marshal Jordan Hayes, 42 years old, plainclothes, experienced, and still on duty. He'd spent most of that day handling court coordination and movement updates tied to an active federal case. Nothing flashy, just work. Real work. The kind that doesn't come with a marked unit or a big introduction for local deputies who think everyone needs to explain themselves to them. The deputy who stopped him was Trent Calloway, County Sheriff's Office, 6 years on the job, too comfortable pushing people around in public. He had the kind of energy that tells you everything early. Loud voice, fast hands, constant need to control the pace. Deputies like that usually call it command presence. A lot of the time, it's just insecurity with a badge. That afternoon, Hayes had parked near a chain restaurant a few minutes from the courthouse corridor. He had gone inside for a short meetup with a task force contact. Quick conversation, case timing, next day logistics. Then he walked back out towards his vehicle with his phone, a file folder, and a jacket draped over one arm. Calloway was already in the lot. Later, he would say he was watching for suspicious behavior because of recent vehicle break-ins nearby. That excuse didn't hold up well. Hayes wasn't checking door handles. He wasn't circling cars. He walked straight to a vehicle he had parked himself. But Calloway had already decided to make contact, and once that type of officer commits to a bad read, the facts stop mattering much. He pulled his patrol SUV across part of the lane behind Hayes' vehicle and got out fast. No normal opening, no calm question. He told Hayes to stop, keep his hands visible, and explain what he was doing there. Hayes didn't match the energy. He slowed down, kept his hands open, and reported that he was a federal officer. He also explained that his credentials were in his jacket. That should have ended the tension right there. A deputy with sense checks the credentials, runs the name if needed, and moves on. Calloway didn't do that. He told Hayes not to reach for anything and demanded ID immediately. Hayes stayed calm and explained where the credentials were. Inside pocket of the jacket. Easy to retrieve. Easy to verify. Calloway ignored the solution and started asking the kind of questions that gave the whole stop away. He wanted to know why Hayes was in that area, whether the vehicle was really his, what business he had there. Not officer safety questions, not traffic questions, belonging questions. People nearby noticed. A delivery driver near the entrance took out his phone. A woman waiting outside started recording too. They weren't reacting to danger. They were reacting to a deputy talking to a calm man, like he'd already decided he was lying. Hayes kept it professional. He gave his full name. He stated his agency. He explained again where the credentials were. He even said dispatch could verify him. Calloway treated all of that like resistance. He ordered Hayes away from the vehicle and moved in for a pat-down. Hayes complied. No sudden moves, no argument, just controlled answers and visible hands. He repeated that he was a deputy U.S. Marshal. Calloway answered that anybody could say that. That line mattered. It showed he heard the identification and chose not to check it. Then he got on the radio and made it worse. He told dispatch he had a suspicious male who was claiming to be federal law enforcement and refusing proper identification. That was the first real point of no return. He wasn't just escalating in person anymore. He was building a false record while witnesses filmed the whole thing. Hayes asked what basis there was for detention. Fair question. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't posturing. He wanted an answer. Calloway didn't give one. He told him to put his hands behind his back. Hayes had a choice. Push back and risk the scene turning uglier, or comply and let the cameras do their job later. He complied. Calloway cuffed him right there in the parking lot. That image changed the whole scene. A plainclothes federal officer in handcuffs beside his own vehicle, while strangers stood a few yards away recording. Nobody looking at it thought they were watching good police work. And Calloway still kept going. He started pressing Hayes with more questions. Why plainclothes? Why the folder? Why no marked unit? Why he was near the restaurant? The questions weren't getting him anywhere. They just showed he had a fixed picture in his head of what authority was supposed to look like, and Hayes didn't fit it. A second unit pulled in a minute later. The backup deputy was Maya Bennett, older, steadier, and a lot less impressed with public theatrics. She stepped out, looked at Hayes in cuffs, looked at the witnesses with phones out, then looked at Calloway. Her first question was the right one. Had the credentials been checked yet? Calloway said no and tried to frame Hayes as evasive. Bennett looked at Hayes and asked for his name. He gave it. Same name, same agency, same calm tone, same explanation about where the credentials were. That's where the balance started to shift. Bennett didn't say much right away, but she didn't need to. She could already see the stop was off, and Calloway knew it. Bennett didn't need long to see the stop was wrong. She asked Calloway what the original reason for contact was. He said Hayes had been acting suspicious around parked cars. Weak answer. The parking lot had cameras. The restaurant had customers going in and out. Hayes had walked straight to one vehicle and never touched another one. Bennett could see that problem immediately. Then she asked the next obvious question. If the man was claiming to be a U.S. Marshal, why hadn't anybody checked the credentials he kept describing? Calloway answered like a man trying to protect a bad decision. He said Hayes was not being straightforward, and that he wanted to secure him first. That sounded better in his head than it did in the lot. Hayes was already cuffed, calm, still giving the same identifying information. The only thing not happening was verification. Bennett moved toward the vehicle. Calloway stopped her and said he'd handle it. That was the moment he made the mistake that killed whatever chance he had left. He walked to the driver's side, opened the door, leaned in and grabbed the jacket from the seat. Then he checked the inside pocket. Exactly where Hayes had said. He pulled out a leather credential wallet and opened it. Federal badge, identification card, name, Jordan Hayes, agency, United States Marshals Service. That should have ended it on the spot. Cuffs off. Clear the scene. Call a supervisor. Start explaining. Calloway still didn't let go. He stood there staring at the credentials, then looked back at Hayes like he was still trying to force the facts to change. He asked why Hayes hadn't just shown them earlier. Bad question. Everybody there already knew the answer. Hayes had been saying where they were from the start. Calloway was the one who blocked it. Bennett stepped in closer and took a look at the credentials herself. She didn't play along. She asked dispatch to verify the badge number. That changed the atmosphere right away. Now it wasn't just a loud deputy controlling a parking lot. Now there was a record moving through official channels. Dispatch repeated the badge number back, then the name, then the agency, active, valid, confirmed, and that should still have been the end. Calloway found one more way to make it worse. He didn't remove the handcuffs. Instead, he started talking like the federal credentials created a bigger problem, not a smaller one. He shifted to the presence of a service weapon in the vehicle and tried to act like that justified everything. It didn't. A U.S. Marshal carrying a duty weapon wasn't suspicious. It was normal. He was reaching now. Everybody could see it. Hayes stayed controlled, but by then the scene had changed for him too. This was no longer some deputy being rough on the edge of procedure. Calloway had the credentials in hand. had dispatch confirmation, and still kept him restrained in public. That's not confusion. That's a deputy refusing to surrender control after the facts are already in. The witnesses picked up on it too. The delivery driver said out loud that the deputy had just confirmed the man was federal and still had him cuffed. The woman by the curb kept filming and moved closer. A couple leaving the restaurant stopped near the entrance and started watching. Nobody had to guess anymore. The central question was simple. Why was this still happening? Bennett asked Calloway, directly this time, whether he was taking the cuffs off. He didn't answer right away. That silence said enough. Then he started talking about officer safety and scene security, the usual language officers use when they've run out of lawful ground but still want to sound official. It wasn't convincing. Hayes was standing still. The credentials were real. The agency was verified. The only unstable thing in that parking lot was Calloway. Bennett called for a field supervisor. That radio traffic mattered. It meant another deputy on scene had stopped treating this like Calloway's stop and started treating it like a problem. Hayes then did something smart. He reported clearly and in front of everyone that he was requesting a supervisor and that his detention continued after confirmation of his federal identity. He was documenting with his voice, not for drama, for the record, because once a case like this gets reviewed, the timeline matters. Calloway heard that and finally seemed to realize how bad it looked. He took a step back, checked the lot, saw the phone still up, then looked at Bennett like he wanted support he wasn't getting. She didn't help him. She stayed where she was and kept the scene calm. A sergeant arrived within minutes. His name was Darren Pike, and unlike Calloway, he didn't walk into the scene trying to dominate it. He read it first. One man in cuffs. One backup deputy standing off to the side instead of backing the arrest. Several civilians recording. Primary deputy visibly tense. That kind of scene tells its own story. Pike asked for a summary. Calloway gave him one. Fast, defensive, and weak. Suspicious activity. Claim of being federal. Safety concern. Investigation ongoing. Then Pike asked Bennett. That was bad for Calloway because Bennett didn't cover for him. She kept it short. Hayes identified himself immediately. He described the location of his credentials accurately. Dispatch had already verified him. He was still in cuffs. Pike looked at Hayes after that. Hayes gave his name, agency, and the sequence cleanly. No speeches, no ranting. He explained that he had identified himself at first contact, reported the location of credentials, complied with commands, and remained detained after both physical and dispatch verification. That version matched the evidence already sitting in multiple phones and at least one body cam. Pike turned back to Calloway and asked the only question that mattered now. On what basis was Hayes still restrained? Calloway had nothing good left. He started with safety again, then suspicion, then the weapon in the vehicle. None of it held together. Pike told him to remove the cuffs. Calloway hesitated. That hesitation might have lasted only a second or two, but it was enough. Enough for Bennett to see it. Enough for the witnesses to catch it. Enough for Pike to realize this deputy wasn't just sloppy. He was refusing to come down, even under supervision. Pike repeated the order. This time, Calloway unlocked the cuffs. Hayes brought his hands forward and rubbed his wrists once. He didn't make a scene. Didn't need to. The damage was already done, and everybody in that lot knew it. Pike handed the credentials back to Hayes and started trying to lower the temperature. Too late for that. The scene was already beyond local cleanup. Hayes informed him that his office would be notified immediately and that all identifying information for the deputies on scene would be documented. Again, not drama, procedure. Calloway stood off to the side now, quiet for the first time since the stop started. That was the first smart thing he'd done all afternoon, and even then it was too late. Because while he was trying to recover, the federal side was already starting to move. Hayes had missed a scheduled case check-in during the detention window. That by itself was enough to trigger a call from his office. One of the witness videos was already being texted around locally. The badge number had been confirmed over dispatch. A county deputy had handcuffed a verified U.S. Marshal in public and kept him detained after confirmation. That kind of mess travels fast, and once federal supervisors got the basic outline, Calloway's problem stopped being a county complaint. It became a federal one. The federal office moved quickly once Hayes missed his scheduled check-in. That wasn't something people brushed off. He was active on assignment and then suddenly unavailable during a detention that had already been partly verified through county dispatch. Once that information reached his office, supervisors started moving. About 12 minutes after the cuffs came off, 2 federal vehicles pulled into the lot. The supervisors got out and went straight to Hayes. The first was Supervisory Deputy U.S. Marshal Vanessa Cole. With her was Inspector Ryan Sutter, who handled internal coordination on incidents involving federal personnel. They checked Hayes first, not the deputies. That told everyone there exactly where the priority was. Hayes gave them the timeline in order: initial contact, immediate identification, location of credentials, handcuffs, dispatch verification, continued detention after confirmation. Cole listened, then asked one question that mattered more than anything else. Was he still in cuffs after his identity had been confirmed? Hayes said yes. After that, Cole turned to Sergeant Pike and asked who had initiated the stop. Pike indicated Trent Calloway. Calloway tried to explain before anyone asked him to. He said he had seen suspicious behavior near parked vehicles, that Hayes had claimed to be federal, and that he had detained him while sorting things out. It was weak. Worse, it was already contradicted by what Hayes had said, what Bennett had seen, and what the witnesses had recorded. Cole asked for specifics. What suspicious behavior? What crime? What justified continued detention after the credentials were found, and dispatch confirmed them? Calloway didn't have clean answers. He bounced between suspicion, safety, and the presence of a firearm in the vehicle. None of it helped him. A U.S. Marshal carrying a duty weapon was not suspicious. It was normal. Then Cole asked whether Hayes had ever refused to identify himself. Calloway said he hadn't provided proper identification at first. Hayes corrected that immediately. He said he identified himself on first contact, gave his full name, stated his agency, and explained where the credentials were. Maya Bennett confirmed that. She didn't hedge. She didn't soften it for Calloway. She just confirmed it. That changed the scene. Now, Calloway wasn't just dealing with a federal supervisor and the man he detained. His own backup deputy was confirming that Hayes had been consistent from the start. Cole then asked Pike whether Calloway was being removed from active control of the scene pending review. Pike paused for a second and then told Calloway to step back and surrender scene control. Another deputy was told to stand with him. He wasn't under arrest right there, but he was done running anything. That hit him hard. A few minutes earlier, he had been acting like the whole parking lot moved on his command. Now he was off to the side, while other people handled the consequences of his stop. He tried to push back, said he had been doing his job, said people were second-guessing him after the fact. That didn't work either. The problem wasn't hindsight. The problem was that Hayes gave him the answer at the start and Calloway ignored it. Cole asked Hayes whether he wanted medical documentation for the cuffs and whether he intended to file formal federal notice of unlawful detention. Hayes said yes to both. That made the next steps unavoidable. Once medical documentation was requested, the wrist restraints became part of the record. Once Hayes confirmed formal notice, this stopped being something the county could smooth over with a vague statement and an internal memo. Then the witness evidence got folded in. The delivery driver who had started recording earlier approached and said he had video covering most of the detention, including the point when the credentials were found. The woman near the curb had footage from earlier in the stop. Sutter took both of their details immediately. He also requested that Pike preserve all bodycam, dashcam, radio traffic, and dispatch logs tied to the stop. Pike agreed. He didn't have much choice. At that point, Calloway made one more mistake. He muttered that none of this would have happened if Hayes had just complied from the start. Cole heard him. So did Pike. So did Bennett. And that line exposed the whole problem. He still thought this was about obedience. Not law, not procedure. Obedience. Cole shut that down right there. She told him Hayes had complied. The issue was that Calloway ignored federal identification, continued the detention after verification, and kept changing the basis for the stop when each excuse failed. That was the end of the argument. Hayes gave his final on-scene account, documented the deputy names and badge numbers, and prepared to leave with Cole and Sutter. Before he did, he looked at Pike and said a badge did not give anyone permission to ignore the law. That line followed the case later for a reason. It was simple and completely accurate. Hayes left with the federal supervisors. Calloway stayed in the lot with his own chain of command. His body camera unit was collected. He was ordered to provide an immediate written summary. Pike also wanted a separate explanation for one specific issue: why Hayes remained in cuffs after dispatch confirmed who he was. There was no good answer to that question. Everybody there knew it. By that night, the stop was already public. The first clip spreading online showed the worst part for Calloway. He had Hayes' federal credentials in hand. Dispatch had already confirmed them, and Hayes was still in cuffs. That was enough to sink any claim that this was just a fast-moving mistake. By morning, local reporters had witnessed video. The restaurant had been asked to preserve exterior camera footage, and the sheriff's office had a problem it couldn't contain with a vague statement. They tried anyway. They said they were aware of the incident and had opened an internal review. That didn't calm anything down. The video was too clear. Hayes looked controlled from start to finish. Calloway looked like a deputy who kept rejecting facts because he didn't want to lose the stop. The federal side moved first. Hayes gave a full statement that same evening. Medical staff photographed the marks on his wrists. Cole and Sutter locked down the initial evidence list: county body cam, dash cam, dispatch audio, CAD logs, witness videos, restaurant surveillance, and every written report tied to the stop. Then they compared the reports to the footage. That comparison buried Calloway. His first written version leaned on suspicious behavior near vehicles. The footage showed Hayes walking straight to one vehicle and not touching another. He also suggested Hayes had been evasive about identification. That fell apart too. Hayes had identified himself right away and kept repeating the same information. Then there was the biggest problem: the continued detention after confirmation. Calloway had no clean explanation for that, because there wasn't one. The sheriff's office put him on administrative leave within 48 hours. That still wasn't the end of it. Once command staff pulled his history, the pattern got harder to ignore. Prior complaints. Traffic stops that escalated too fast. Repeated accusations that he got aggressive the moment someone questioned him. None of that had stopped him before. Now it all came back at once, because that's how these cases go. Departments ignore the warning signs for years, then act surprised when one deputy finally blows up on camera. Bennett's statement made things worse for him, too. She confirmed Hayes had been consistent from the start, and that verification had been available early. Pike's report didn't help either. He documented that Calloway had no solid reason for keeping Hayes restrained after dispatch confirmation. That pushed the case beyond internal discipline. The U.S. Marshal's Service filed a formal complaint. The U.S. Attorney's Office was notified. A civil rights review started looking at whether the detention crossed into a federal violation under color of law. At the same time, Hayes hired counsel and prepared a civil claim against the county and Calloway personally. That was a pressure from every direction. The county tried damage control. They talked about retraining, review procedures, better coordination with federal agencies. Standard language. Too late. The real problem wasn't lack of policy on paper. The problem was one deputy thinking he could ignore the facts in front of him and force the situation his way. Calloway was fired 3 months later. The termination letter cited unlawful detention, false or misleading reporting, failure to follow verification procedure, and conduct damaging to the department. The state certification board opened its own review after that. Losing the job was bad. Losing the license was worse. Once that process started, He wasn't just out of one department. He was looking at the end of law enforcement as a career. Then came the civil side. Hayes's claim was strong for one reason above all others. The facts were simple. He identified himself. He explained where the credentials were. They were found exactly where he said. Dispatch confirmed him. The detention still continued. Juries understand that kind of timeline fast. The county settled before trial. They paid Hayes, agreed to outside review of detention and identity verification procedures, and adopted a rule requiring field supervisors to respond immediately when a local officer detains a verified federal law enforcement officer or disputes on-scene credentials. They also expanded Bodycam preservation rules in cases involving civil rights complaints. Hayes went back to work. That part matters. He didn't turn into a celebrity. He didn't start doing interviews every week. He went back to the job, but the case followed him in one useful way. Inside federal circles, it became a training example. Local ego, bad stop, ignored credentials, public detention, confirmed identity, no off-ramp. Exactly the kind of failure that can wreck a department and expose it to federal review. Calloway's name followed the case too, for the opposite reason. He became the example of what happens when an officer treats authority like personal control instead of legal responsibility. And that's the point of this whole story. Jordan Hayes stayed calm, stayed precise, and let the facts hold. That's what saved him. Calloway kept pushing after the truth was already in his hands. That's what finished him. A badge gives authority. It doesn't cancel the law. Let me know what you would have done in Hayes' position. And if you've ever seen an officer double down instead of admit a mistake, drop that in the comments too. Share the story with somebody who needs the reminder, and subscribe for more stories like this.
Step away from the register and keep your hands where I can see them.
I already did. If the machine missed an item, I asked for help.
You're being detained.
On what charge?
Suspected theft.
The store can confirm in less than a minute that I never tried to leave and never refused payment.
Turn around. Get a supervisor on scene.
This patrolman thought he was in full control of a routine call at a grocery store. Then he made the worst decision of his career. He brushed off the identification in front of him, treated a minor checkout dispute like a criminal incident, and put an off-duty Navy commander in handcuffs in front of a store full of people. The whole thing looked one-sided for about a minute. Then the shift supervisor walked in, saw who was cuffed, and everything changed. Before we get into it, say where you're watching from in the comments. And if you follow stories about bad policing, abuse of authority, and real consequences, like and subscribe. This one is exactly about that. It started at a grocery store outside Norfolk on a Thursday evening. Busy checkout lines. People getting off work. Nothing unusual. The man at the center of it was Commander Daniel Mercer, 43, active duty Navy, off duty that night, still in plain clothes after a long day. He had stopped in to buy a few things before heading home. It should have taken 10 minutes. Mercer was not loud. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was the kind of man who stayed composed because that was how he lived. Years in command had trained that into him. He spoke clearly, paid attention, and didn't get rattled easily. That helped him later, because the officer who showed up was the exact opposite. The issue began at self-checkout. Small problem. One item didn't scan properly. Mercer noticed the total was off before finishing the transaction and called over an employee. That's all it was, a register problem. The employee was young, unsure, and called the floor manager instead of fixing it. The manager, Laura Bennett, came over already irritated. She looked at the screen, looked at the bagged items, and jumped straight to suspicion. Mercer explained that the machine had missed an item and that he had asked for help before completing payment. He pointed to the screen and told her to check the transaction. Bennett didn't do that. She started speaking to him like he had been caught trying to sneak something out. He corrected her, calmly. He told her he was not refusing to pay and was not leaving with unpaid items. He wanted the register fixed so he could finish and leave. That should have ended it. It didn't because Bennett took his calm tone the wrong way. She acted like he was being difficult because he wasn't backing down. She wanted the scene under control fast, and instead of solving the problem, she called police. That call brought Officer Ryan Kessler. Kessler came in like he was walking into a custody situation, not a store complaint. He didn't start by checking the register. He didn't ask the cashier what happened first. He didn't slow the scene down. Bennett gave him a version that made Mercer sound like a problem customer refusing to cooperate. Kessler accepted that version almost immediately. He walked up to Mercer and told him to step away from the checkout and explain what he was doing. Mercer did step away. Then he explained the issue from the beginning. Missed scan, manager overreaction, still trying to pay. Clear enough, Kessler didn't deal with any of that. He switched straight to authority. He asked for identification in a sharp tone. Mercer took out his wallet slowly and handed over his ID along with his military credentials. He wasn't making a speech. He wasn't trying to pull rank. He was identifying himself and showing exactly who he was. Kessler barely looked. That was the first real mistake. Mercer told him this was a checkout dispute, not a theft case. He said the store could verify the transaction in less than a minute if anyone bothered to check. Kessler didn't want to verify. He wanted a compliance first, facts later. He started talking over Mercer instead of listening to him. Then he treated every attempt to explain his attitude. That's how these situations go bad. Not because the facts are confusing, because one person decides he doesn't need them. Mercer stayed steady. He repeated that he had not tried to leave, had not refused payment, and had already identified himself. Kessler kept pushing. He told Mercer to stop arguing and follow instructions. Mercer answered that he was cooperating, but he was not going to agree to something false just to make the officer comfortable. That line got under Kessler's skin. He stepped closer, his tone changed. Now it wasn't about the store anymore, it was about obedience. He started framing Mercer as non-compliant, even though Mercer was standing there, answering questions and not doing anything aggressive. The cashier at the next station stopped pretending to work and just watched. A couple of customers started paying attention. One woman pulled out her phone. She could tell this was turning into something it never needed to become. Mercer saw it too. He kept his voice level and told Kessler again to review the transaction record and speak to the employee who had first responded. That would have settled the whole matter. Kessler ignored that and demanded Mercer put his hands where he could see them. Mercer did. Then Kessler told him he was being detained while they figured out what was going on. That made no sense, and Mercer said so. He told him there was no reason to detain him over a checkout error. That store staff could fix on the screen right in front of them. Kessler answered the way officers answer when they know they don't have much, with volume and repetition. He told Mercer not to make it worse. Now people were watching openly. Bennett looked less confident because the scene had gone past what she expected. She wanted Mercer pressured. She didn't expect cuffs. The customers filming could already tell Kessler had skipped several steps. He had not checked the machine. He had not checked the receipt history. He had not checked the credentials in his hand. He had chosen the fastest path to force. Mercer understood exactly where it was going. He had dealt with enough authority figures in and out of the military to know when somebody had decided he needed to win in front of an audience. That was the dangerous part. Once ego takes over, the facts stop mattering. And that's where this turned from a stupid store dispute into a career-ending mistake. Officer Ryan Kessler had already handled the call badly inside the store. Part 2 is where he crossed the line. Once he said Daniel Mercer was being detained, he needed a real legal reason. He didn't have one. The register hadn't been checked. The transaction log hadn't been reviewed. The employee who first responded hadn't been properly questioned. Kessler still moved forward, like the facts were already settled. Mercer told him again that the machine had failed to scan one item and that store staff could confirm that on the screen. Kessler cut him off and ordered him to turn around. Mercer asked what crime he was being detained for. Kessler answered with a vague line about interfering with an investigation. That was weak from the start, and people nearby could hear it. Mercer complied. Kessler put him in handcuffs right there near self-checkout. That was the moment the whole situation changed. Up to that point, this was still a bad response to a simple store problem. Once the cuffs went on, it became an unlawful detention in front of witnesses, cameras, and store employees who already knew the item had not scanned correctly. The customers around them understood that much almost immediately. They had watched Mercer stay in place, explain the same thing more than once, and offer identification. They had also watched Kessler skip the easy checks and go straight to force. A couple of people pulled out phones. One person near the next register stopped scanning groceries and just stared. The cashier who had first helped Mercer looked like he wanted no part of what was happening. Kessler still had Mercer's ID and military credentials. That made it worse. Mercer had identified himself. Kessler had chosen not to verify it before cuffing him. That wasn't confusion. That was ego. Mercer told him the cuffs were unnecessary and said the credentials could be confirmed in minutes. Kessler answered that he didn't care about rank or title. He thought that made him sound firm. It actually showed he was ignoring information that mattered to the stop. Then he started adding extra labels to the detention. Suspected theft, disorderly conduct. None of it fit. Mercer had not threatened anyone. He had not tried to leave. He had not caused a disturbance. Kessler was padding the scene because the original reason was already falling apart. A customer asked what Mercer had done. Kessler told everyone to step back and mind their business. That only made more people pay attention. Then one of the younger employees said what should have been said from the beginning. He told the manager the item had not scanned and that Mercer had asked for help before finishing the transaction. Several customers heard that. So did Kessler. He ignored it. That told everyone exactly what kind of stop this was. He was no longer trying to figure out what happened. He was trying to protect the decision he had already made. Mercer told him to get a supervisor on scene before he made it worse. Clear sentence, direct point. Kessler didn't take the warning seriously. He acted like Mercer was just another customer trying to talk his way out of trouble. Then he moved Mercer toward the front of the store. That was another bad call. Now the detention was even more public. More customers saw the cuffs. More phones came up. Someone near the entrance started recording from farther back, which gave a full view of the scene. Mercer did not argue. He told one bystander to keep recording. Smart move. He understood exactly what mattered now. Outside in the parking lot, Kessler radioed dispatch and gave a version that made him sound in control. He reported a non-compliant male involved in a suspected theft incident. That statement mattered later because it showed he was shaping the record before checking basic facts. Mercer stood by the patrol car in handcuffs, while Kessler searched him and removed his wallet, phone, and keys. Then Kessler looked again at the military credentials. This time, he slowed down. He was starting to understand they were real. But by then, the damage had already been done. Mercer told him again to verify the ID and review the store footage. Kessler said nothing useful. He kept moving, kept talking into the radio, kept acting like he still had the upper hand. Inside the store, manager Laura Bennett had finally realized this was not going away. She told an employee to save the self-checkout record and preserve the camera footage. She was not helping Mercer. She was protecting herself. Then another patrol vehicle pulled into the lot. That was when Ryan Kessler's confidence started to break. Lieutenant Sarah Duran arrived before Kessler had time to clean up his own mess. That mattered. A few more minutes and he might have shaped the whole report around his version first. She stepped out, looked at the scene, and understood right away that something was off. Grocery store parking lot. Handcuffed man in plain clothes. No active threat. No stolen property laid out. No upset victim demanding action. Just Officer Ryan Kessler standing beside a patrol car trying to look in control. Kessler started talking before she even finished walking up. He gave her the quick version officers use when they want the supervisor moving in their direction from the start. Suspected theft. Uncooperative subject. Ongoing investigation. He was trying to frame Mercer as the problem before she asked her own questions. Duran didn't buy it that fast. She asked what had been taken. Kessler said the store believed Mercer had failed to pay for merchandise. She asked whether the register record had been checked. He said not yet. She asked whether store video had been reviewed. No. She asked whether the employee who handled the transaction had been interviewed. Not fully, that was already bad. Then she asked why the man was in cuffs. Kessler said Mercer had been argumentative and was interfering. That answer hurt him more than it helped. It was thin, and Duran knew it. Then she turned to Mercer. He identified himself as Commander Daniel Mercer, United States Navy. He told her he had presented both civilian and military identification before being cuffed. He explained the register issue in one straight line. One item failed to scan. He asked for help. The manager assumed theft. The officer escalated before checking the facts. No speeches, no attitude, just a clean summary. Then Duran asked to see the credentials. Kessler handed them over. That was the moment his control of the scene ended. She looked at the IDs, read them properly, and her expression changed. Not dramatic, just immediate. She asked Mercer his command affiliation. He answered. She asked one follow-up question that someone outside that world would not think to ask. Mercer answered that too, without hesitation. That was enough. She knew the identification was real, and more important, she knew Kessler had ignored it before using force. Then she asked the store manager to come outside. Laura Bennett walked out already nervous. Duran asked her to explain exactly what Mercer had done. Bennett gave a weaker version than the one she probably gave Kessler inside. She said there had been a checkout issue and concern about unpaid merchandise. Duran asked whether Mercer tried to leave. Bennett admitted he had not. She asked whether he refused to pay. Bennett admitted he had asked to fix the scan issue. She asked whether anyone had checked the machine record before police put him in cuffs. Bennett said no. That was enough to settle it. Duran told Kessler to remove the handcuffs. No long discussion. No face-saving language, just the order. He hesitated for a second. Small mistake. Duran repeated it sharper this time. Then he took the cuffs off. Mercer brought his hands forward and rubbed his wrists once. He didn't rant. He didn't posture. He let the scene speak for itself. That made Kessler look even worse, because now everyone in that parking lot could see the difference between the two men. One had stayed under control the whole time. The other had escalated a grocery store dispute into a detention with no proper basis. Duran asked another officer to separate Kessler from the scene. That was the public collapse. A few minutes earlier, he had been running the stop. Now he was being moved away from the subject, away from the manager, and away from the witnesses while his supervisor took over. The customer's recording caught that too. They understood exactly what it meant. Once a supervisor sidelines the original officer in public, the damage is already serious. Duran then did what Kessler should have done from the start. She had the cashier brought out. The cashier confirmed Mercer had flagged the scanning problem before completing the transaction. She had the self-checkout record pulled. It matched Mercer's account. One item had not registered correctly, no completed theft, no attempt to leave. No criminal conduct that justified cuffs. Then she looked back at Kessler. He tried one more time to defend himself. He said Mercer was being difficult, and that he had to make a fast decision. Duran shut that down immediately. She told him this was not a fast-moving, violent call. He had time to check the facts, and chose not to. That's what buried him. Mercer then made his position clear. He said he wanted the names and badge numbers of every officer involved. He wanted confirmation that all Bodycam footage would be preserved. He wanted the store advised to keep all checkout and surveillance records. He also stated that he would be filing both civilian and military complaints. That changed the temperature again. A random shopper filing a complaint is one thing. An active duty Navy commander with documented unlawful detention, multiple witnesses, store records, and body cam footage is something else. Duran knew it. Kessler knew it. Bennett knew it too. Kessler had nothing useful left to say. The attitude from inside the store was gone. He looked like every officer looks when the report he planned to write is already falling apart in real time. And the worst part for him was simple. This had not happened during some chaotic felony stop. It happened over one missed scan at a grocery store. The fallout started that same night. Lieutenant Sarah Duran removed Ryan Kessler from field duty before the shift ended. His body cam, radio traffic, and incident notes were locked down. The store was ordered to preserve checkout logs and surveillance. By the next morning, customer videos were already circulating locally, and the department knew it had a serious problem. Commander Daniel Mercer did exactly what Kessler should have expected. He filed a formal complaint with the department, notified Navy legal channels, and retained civilian counsel. He kept it measured. No grandstanding. Just facts, timestamps, witnesses, and footage. Internal affairs moved fast because the case was clean. Kessler had ignored identification, skipped basic verification, used handcuffs without a solid legal basis, and then tried to justify it after the fact. That combination ended him. He was suspended, then terminated after the administrative investigation. His state certification was also challenged, which effectively closed the door on working patrol again. By 2026, the civil case was still remembered as one of the department's most damaging avoidable incidents. The city resolved the claim before trial under pressure from the footage, witness statements, and the department's own findings. The department also changed policy after the scandal. Officers now had to document verification steps in retail detention calls before using restraints unless there was a real safety threat. Supervisory review requirements were tightened. Military and government credential verification got added to refresher training because ignoring ID had become one of the biggest embarrassment points in the whole case. The bigger lesson was simple. Kessler thought authority meant he could force the facts to fit his mood. It doesn't work like that. One bad ego call in a grocery store cost him his badge, cost the city money, and damaged trust for no reason. That's the story. What would you have done if you were standing there watching it happen? Put your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to see it, and subscribe for more stories like this.
Pack your things up. You need to leave the park.
Why?
Suspicious activity.
Suspicious activity by who?
That's what we're here to figure out.
Are you giving me a lawful order or are you asking us to leave?
ID, now.
Why are there 3 officers around my...
What happens when the people sworn to enforce the law step past their limits in front of someone who knows exactly where those limits end? A quiet afternoon at the park turned into a tense public stop when police detained a mixed-race family without giving a clear reason. What they did not know was that the father was a U.S. Marshal, and the entire stop started breaking down the moment his identity came out. Tell me where you're watching from, and if you like stories about overreach, accountability, and people who stay calm under pressure, like and subscribe. This one shows how fast a normal family day can turn into a public humiliation when officers start with assumptions and work backward. The family had been at the park for less than an hour. Elias Carter was there with his wife Naomi and their 2 children. It was a normal Saturday. Playground, snacks, kids moving between the swings and the open grass, other families nearby. Nothing unusual. No argument. No disturbance. No one paying them special attention. Then a patrol car pulled up near the entrance. At first, Elias thought the officers were there for something else. That lasted maybe a few seconds. The moment they stepped out, looked across the park, and headed straight for his family. It was clear who they had come for. Officer Brent Keller approached first. He acted like the decision had already been made. He told the family to collect their things and leave the park. No clear explanation, no specific complaint, no law, just an order. Elias stood up and asked the first question that mattered. He asked why. Keller said they were responding to suspicious activity. That was it, nothing specific. He did not describe a report. He did not say what anyone had done. He did not point to a rule. He just kept the language broad enough to sound official. Naomi asked, suspicious activity by who? Fair question. No real answer. That was the first sign the stop had no clean foundation. Elias kept his voice level. He asked whether the officer was giving a lawful order or making a request. Keller did not answer that directly either. He repeated that the family needed to leave. That exchange changed the tone. The second officer moved in closer. Not aggressive yet, just close enough to tighten the space around the family. Another stayed a few steps back and watched. The officers were creating pressure before they had justified the stop. Elias noticed it right away. He had seen that pattern before. Take control first, explain later. Hope the target gets nervous and gives you something to use. He did not give them that. He told Naomi to stay with the children. Then he faced the officers again and asked if he was being detained. Again, no clear answer. Keller shifted to identification. He told Elias to provide ID. Elias asked the next obvious question. He asked what legal basis they had to demand identification from a man standing in a public park with his family when they had not stated a crime. That irritated Keller. You could see the stop moving from vague to personal. He said Elias was making things harder than they needed to be. That is usually the moment an officer starts setting up the next step. Not because the citizen has done something dangerous, because the officer does not like being questioned. A few people in the park had started watching by then. 2 parents near the playground, a man walking his dog, someone sitting on a bench near the path. It was still quiet, but people were paying attention now. Naomi was watching the officers and the children at the same time. Their daughter had gone silent. Their son had moved closer to her side. Kids know when adults stop sounding normal. A third officer told Naomi to keep the children back and step away from Elias. That made the stop worse. Fast. Now they were separating the parents in front of the kids, and they still had not explained what justified any of it. Elias said that out loud. He said they were escalating the contact without stating clear cause. He also said that if he was being detained, he wanted that stated clearly on camera. That mattered. By then, at least 2 bystanders had phones out. Keller heard it. He looked at the phones. Then he looked back at Elias. His tone got sharper. He told Elias to stop arguing and provide identification immediately. Elias did not argue. He kept asking direct questions. He wanted the officers to commit to a reason. He knew vague language sounds a lot weaker once people replay it later. One of the officers moved to Elias's side and reached toward his arm. Elias immediately said he was not resisting. He kept his hands visible. He told them again that he did not consent to being detained without cause. That should have slowed the stop down. It did not. Keller said they were going to detain him while they figured things out. That line told everyone watching exactly what this was. They were taking control first and looking for justification second. Naomi stepped forward half a pace and demanded to know why her husband was being detained. She did not shout. She sounded scared and angry, which made sense because her children were watching officers close in on their father for no stated reason in the middle of a public park. One of the kids started crying. A woman near the benches could be heard saying the family had not done anything. Another bystander raised a phone higher to get a clear shot of the scene. Elias stayed steady. That was the only thing keeping it from getting worse. He told Naomi to stay with the kids. Then he started doing something the officers clearly did not expect. He began documenting the stop out loud. He stated the time. He noted the number of officers. He repeated that no one had given a clear legal basis for the detention. He asked for names and badge numbers. He asked again whether he was free to leave. No one answered that cleanly. Keller then ordered Elias to put his hands behind his back. Elias did not fight. He did not raise his voice. He said he would not resist, but He wanted it noted that he had asked repeatedly for the legal basis of the stop and had not been given one. That was when the scene fully turned. More people were filming now. Naomi was trying to keep the children close while also watching her husband get restrained in front of them. Keller had started the stop like he owned it. At that point, he looked less certain. Not because he suddenly understood the law, because he understood that people were recording and Elias was staying calm enough to make every weak answer stand out. The officers still did not know who he was. That part was coming next. Keller ordered Elias to put his hands behind his back. Elias complied. He turned slowly and said he was not resisting. He also said he wanted the reason for the detention stated clearly on camera. No one gave one. 2 officers cuffed him while Naomi and the children watched from a few feet away. That was the moment the stop changed. It was no longer an argument over leaving the park. It was now a public detention with no clear legal basis. Naomi asked why her husband was being handcuffed. An officer told her to stay back with the children. That was the answer she got. Not a charge, not an explanation, just another command. Their daughter started crying. Their son moved closer to Naomi and kept looking at the cuffs. The officers kept working like this was routine. It was not. Elias stayed focused. He asked 3 direct questions. Was he under arrest or only detained? What offense were they claiming? Who was the supervisor coming to the scene? Those were basic questions. The officers still would not answer them properly. Keller said they were investigating and needed to identify him. That made the problem worse, not better. They had already put him in cuffs and still could not explain what crime they thought had happened. A man near the walking path said the family had been sitting there the whole time. Another bystander asked what law had been broken. Keller told both of them to stay back. More phones came out. One officer asked Elias where his identification was. Elias said his wallet was in the family bag near the bench. Then he made another point clearly. He said he did not consent to any search beyond what the officers believed they were legally allowed to do. Naomi immediately watched the bag. She understood what was happening. The officers had started with a weak stop, then a detention, and now they were moving into the family's belongings. A younger officer walked to the bench and picked up the bag anyway. Naomi objected right away. She asked why they were opening family property when no one had explained the detention. The officers said they were trying to identify Elias. He found the wallet and handed it to Keller. Keller checked the driver's license. That should have slowed everything down. It did not. He looked at the car, then back at Elias, and kept pushing. He asked whether Elias had any weapons on him. That question changed the stop. Elias answered carefully. He said he was lawfully armed in an official capacity. He also said he wanted a supervisor present before that went any further. The officers reacted to that, not with panic, more with confusion. One looked at Keller. Another stopped moving and watched. Naomi caught it too. She could tell the answer had landed. Keller asked what official capacity meant. Elias did not rush. He said he would identify himself fully when the supervisor arrived. Until then, he wanted the detention documented properly. That answer was controlled and deliberate. He was not refusing to identify himself. He was making sure the officers sat in the stop they had already created. Keller got on the radio and called for a sergeant. The wording mattered. He requested a supervisor at the park and described Elias as a detained male with armed status needing clarification. That was not neutral language. He was already framing the story in a way that protected himself. Elias said so right away. He stated that he had not resisted, had not threatened anyone, and had repeatedly asked for the legal basis of the detention. He also said the officers were trying to justify the stop after the fact. A woman filming near the playground said the whole thing was on video. A man near the path said they still had not explained why they grabbed him. The officers ignored them, but the scene was getting harder to control. One of the children asked Naomi if they were taking their father away. She stayed with the kids and did her best to keep them calm, but it was obvious the damage was already done. The children had seen their father cuffed in public for no reason they could understand. Elias kept asking for names and badge numbers. One officer gave his name. Keller did not. He said the family could get that information later through the department. That was another bad sign. The sergeant had still not arrived. So the officer stayed there with Elias in cuffs, his wife and children a few feet away, and several bystanders recording from different angles. Keller looked at the wallet again. Then he asked Elias what he did for work. This time, Elias answered. He said he was a deputy United States Marshal. That stopped the scene cold. Keller's face changed first. Then the officer beside him looked at the wallet again. The younger officer near the bench froze for a second. Naomi said nothing, but she could see they finally understood who they had detained. And for them, that made everything worse, not better. The stop changed the second Elias said what he did for a living. He said he was a deputy U.S. Marshal. Keller looked back at the wallet, then pulled out the federal credentials. Another officer checked them too. Nobody had much to say after that. The confidence was gone. A minute earlier, they had been talking over him, cuffing him in front of his wife and kids, and acting like they could sort the reason out later. Now they understood they had detained a federal officer in public, with cameras pointed at them from every direction. Keller called for the sergeant again. This time his voice was different, shorter, more careful. He asked dispatch to verify the credentials right away. Elias kept control of the record. He said clearly that he had asked for the legal basis of the detention from the start and had never been given one. He said no officer had named a crime before putting him in cuffs. He wanted that on every recording. Dispatch confirmed the credentials. That ended any doubt. Naomi looked at the officers and could see it on their faces. They were not trying to control the scene anymore. They were waiting for a supervisor to clean it up. Sergeant Hargrove arrived a minute later. He took one look at Elias in cuffs, the family, the bystanders filming, and knew the stop was already a problem. Keller tried to explain it fast, but Hargrove checked the credentials himself and walked straight to Elias. He said they needed to de-escalate. Elias answered that they should have thought about that before detaining him in front of his wife and children without stating cause. Then he asked for the sergeant's name, badge number, and confirmation that the detention was being documented. Hargrove told an officer to remove the cuffs. Once they were off, Elias asked the question that mattered most. What was the legal basis for the detention? Hargrove did not answer directly. He said officers had received a call and were investigating. Same weak answer, just in a calmer voice. Naomi then asked whether anyone was going to explain to the children why their father had been handcuffed. Hargrove had nothing useful for that. Elias stayed with facts. He requested every officer's name and badge number. He asked for the incident number. He asked whether all body cameras had been running from the start. Now the officers gave answers. That was the real shift. Not just that they knew who he was. It was that the stop had become a documented problem. They could no longer talk their way around. Once the cuffs came off, Hargrove tried to bring the temperature down and move the family out of the moment. That did not work. Elias was done accepting vague language. He asked for the incident number. He asked which officer had made first contact. He asked whether the department was treating this as a documented detention. Hargrove answered carefully because by then he knew this was headed far beyond a park supervisor note. Naomi stayed focused on the children first. That came before everything else. Their daughter was still crying on and off. Their son had stopped asking questions, which was worse. He just stayed close and watched every officer like he did not know what they might do next. That is what these stops do to families. Even after the pressure comes off, the damage stays in the air. The bystanders did not just walk away either. A few came over once the officers stepped back. One woman said she had recorded the whole thing from the moment Elias was first surrounded. A man near the path said he had the handcuffing on video from another angle. Another parent said the family had been sitting there peacefully the whole time and offered to give a statement. That was bad news for the department. Not because one complaint was coming, because a full timeline was coming. Elias took names and contact information. He did not make a speech. He did not threaten anybody. He just collected facts. Witnesses, video angles, timestamps, officer names, supervisor name, badge numbers, incident details. He knew exactly how these cases go. Departments get selective when the record is thin. This record was not thin. The officers left the park one unit at a time. No apology worth hearing, no real explanation, just the usual effort to back out without saying the obvious part out loud. But the obvious part was already sitting in multiple phones. That night, the videos started moving. First local posts, then community pages, then bigger accounts that focus on police misconduct and public encounters. The clip that hit hardest was not the identity reveal. It was the part before that. Elias standing calm, Naomi asking basic questions, the children watching their father get cuffed, while officers refused to say clearly what he had done. That is the part people reacted to. By the next morning, the department had a problem it could not bury under standard language. A mixed-race family had been detained in a public park. The father turned out to be a U.S. Marshal. The officers had no strong public explanation, and too many people had video. The department released the usual statement. They said they were aware of the incident. They said they had opened an internal review. They said professionalism and public trust mattered. Same script departments use when they do not want to admit the real issue on day one. It did not calm anything down. Local reporters picked it up, then regional outlets. Then national pages started running the story because the facts were simple and ugly. Officers approached a family in a public space. They escalated without a clear reason. They cuffed the father in front of his children. Then they found out he was federal law enforcement and suddenly wanted to slow everything down. That kind of story spreads because people recognize the pattern. Elias and Naomi filed formal complaints, not emotional ones, detailed ones. They included the sequence of events, the exact questions asked, the lack of clear answers, the names of witnesses, and the existence of multiple videos. Elias also made sure the complaint addressed the children being present during the detention. That part mattered to him. This was not just about him being cuffed. It was about what his family had been put through. The review did not stay internal for long. Once the body camera footage was pulled, the department had another problem. The officers' public behavior matched what the bystanders had recorded. The questions were there. The vague answers were there. The detention came before any clear legal basis was stated. That is hard to defend when everything is on camera. Keller was pulled from patrol during the investigation. Hargrove caught review too, not for starting the stop, but for how he handled the fallout once he arrived. The department also had to answer a bigger question. Why had a family in a public park become a detention scene so quickly in the first place? That is where these stories stop being about one officer. The city asked for an outside review. Civil rights groups got involved. Community meetings got louder. More people came forward with their own stories about vague stops, aggressive tone, and officers using suspicion like it was enough by itself. That is how one public incident turns into a wider problem. Not because the department suddenly discovers misconduct exists, because the cameras finally make denial harder. For Elias, the result was not some movie-style victory. He was still angry. Naomi was still angry. The children had questions for weeks. Public accountability does not erase that part. It just means the humiliation does not disappear without a record. The family changed parks for a while. The kids noticed every patrol car after that. Naomi noticed too. Elias did what trained people do. He kept moving, kept documenting, kept the focus on process. But he knew exactly what the park stop had done. It took an ordinary family afternoon and turned it into evidence. In the months that followed, the department changed its public contact guidance for park stops and non-criminal detentions. Supervisory response rules got tighter. Officers were retrained on detention standards, identification demands, and public space encounters. None of that happened out of goodwill. It happened because the department had been cornered by footage, witnesses, and a man who knew exactly how to preserve the truth. That is the lesson here. Authority is not the same thing as legality. A badge does not erase the need for cause. And when officers start with pressure instead of facts, the smartest thing a person can do is stay calm, ask clear questions, and make sure the moment is documented. What would you have done in that situation? Have you ever seen officers act like they could explain themselves later and control people first? Put it in the comments. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories about power, pressure, and...
Turn around and put your hands on the hood.
For what? You still haven't told me why I was stopped.
Do what I said.
I'm asking for the legal reason.
You're acting suspicious.
What happens when a local patrol officer stops a driver, sees federal credentials, and still decides to push forward like none of that matters? One roadside detention turned into a legal mess. The second that officer ignored what was in front of him. Was he being careful, or was he trying to force control after the stop stopped making sense? That question followed the case from the shoulder of the road all the way into federal court. Tell me where you're watching from, and if you follow stories about Bodycam evidence, bad stops, and real consequences when officers cross the line, like the video and subscribe. His name was Daniel Mercer. He was an undercover FBI asset working around a sensitive federal investigation in Metro Atlanta. On that evening, he was heading home after a long day downtown. He wasn't speeding, he wasn't weaving, he wasn't doing anything that stood out. He drove the way a lot of trained law enforcement people drive when they know any stop can become a problem. Slow, clean, careful. Around 7:45 p.m., he saw patrol lights in his mirror, signaled, and pulled over near a gas station where the area was lit and visible. The patrol officer was Aaron Boone, 5 years on the job, already carrying himself like every simple stop was a test of authority. He walked up with his hand close to his weapon and asked for license and registration. Mercer answered the right way. He told Boone he was going to reach for the paperwork, then did it slowly. The registration came first, then the wallet. Inside the wallet were his driver's license and federal credentials. Boone saw them. That should have settled the stop. It didn't. Boone's tone got sharper, not calmer. He ordered Mercer out of the SUV. Mercer asked why he had been stopped. Boone didn't answer the question. He repeated the order, louder. That was the first sign the stop had stopped being professional. When an officer has a real reason, he usually says it. When he doesn't, he leans on pressure. A second unit arrived before Boone had even explained the stop. The backup officer moved to the passenger side and started scanning the inside of the vehicle. Mercer stepped out. He stayed calm. Dress shirt, slacks, work shoes. No aggressive posture. No argument for the sake of argument. He kept asking the same basic thing. What was the legal reason for the stop? Boone kept moving past that like it didn't matter. Boone put Mercer against the hood and patted him down harder than needed. Then the backup officer began searching the SUV. Mercer said clearly that he did not consent. They searched anyway. Console, glove box, under the seats. They were no longer checking something specific. They were looking for anything that could justify what Boone had already done. They found nothing. Boone then asked if there were weapons in the vehicle. Mercer answered directly. Yes, he was federally authorized to carry, and the weapon was secured in a locked compartment between the front seats. Boone removed it. By then, people at the gas station had started paying attention. A couple of them pulled out their phones. That changed the stop immediately. Boone was still in control of the scene, but now he was also being watched. Mercer still didn't give him anything useful. No yelling, no sudden movement, no resistance. That made Boone look worse every minute the stop continued. Officers like Boone expect panic or pushback because it gives them something to write down later. Mercer gave him neither. Then Boone ordered him to turn around and put his hands behind his back. Mercer asked what he was being detained for. Boone said suspicious activity. That was the explanation. A man driving lawfully, pulling over correctly, and showing valid federal identification was now being called suspicious. Boone cuffed him and put him in the back of the patrol car. Mercer asked for a supervisor. He asked more than once. He also asked Cest to make a phone call. Boone ignored both requests while he and the other officer kept searching the SUV. This is where the stop turned from bad judgment into ego. Boone already had enough information to slow down and verify. He chose not to. He had seen the credentials. He had heard the explanation. He knew Mercer wasn't some random guy inventing a story on the shoulder. But once Boone had committed to the detention, backing off would mean admitting he was wrong. So he doubled down. At one point, the officers found Mercer's work laptop and started to open it. Mercer told them it contained sensitive federal case material, and they had no authority to access it. That made them pause. For the first time, Boone looked like he understood he might be stepping into a situation bigger than he could control. About 45 minutes into the detention, a supervisor arrived. Her name was Sergeant Lena Ortiz. She spoke to Boone first. Boone told her he had made the stop because of a broken taillight. Ortiz checked the vehicle. The taillights were working. Boone then switched to a different reason. He said the SUV matched a vehicle tied to a robbery report from weeks earlier in another part of the city. Same stop. New story. That's where the whole thing started falling apart. Boone also told Ortiz that Mercer had been aggressive and uncooperative. That claim had a problem. The body cam was running. Witnesses had been recording too. Mercer had stayed controlled the entire time. No threats, no resistance, no scene. Boone was now locked into a version of events that the footage could test. Ortiz went to the patrol car, got Mercer's wallet, and looked at the credentials herself. Then she made a phone call to verify them. That should have happened much earlier, before the cuffs, before the search, before the stop dragged out in front of a growing crowd. After that call, the tone changed fast. Ortiz opened the patrol car door and told Mercer he was being released. The cuffs came off. Mercer stepped out and looked at the inside of his SUV. Papers were scattered, his work bag had been emptied, his things had been moved around during the search. He asked the questions Boone had avoided from the start. What was the reason for the stop? What justified the detention? What justified the search? Ortiz gave the standard answer departments use when they know the facts are bad. She called it a misunderstanding. Mercer knew better. This was not confusion. Boone had seen federal credentials and kept going. He had ordered a detention, backed a search, ignored repeated requests for a supervisor, and changed the reason for the stop once a supervisor arrived. That was the roadside record so far. And Mercer understood something Boone didn't yet. The stop was over. The evidence part was just starting. Daniel Mercer didn't drive away and let it go. That was Boone's first real mistake after the stop itself. He assumed release would close the problem. It did the opposite. Mercer stood there for another minute and did what experienced people do when they know a case is already building. He took photos of the SUV. He photographed the inside, the papers out of place, the compartments that had been opened, the work bag that had been emptied. Then he photographed his wrists. The cuffs had left clear red marks. He also got contact information from the people who had recorded the stop. Some of them sent him their video files that same night. Boone had spent nearly an hour trying to control the scene. Now the scene was leaving with half a dozen witnesses. The next morning, Mercer went straight to his federal supervisor. He didn't come in emotional. He came in organized. Timeline first, stop location, approximate time, names and badge numbers, search, detention, firearm removal, refusal to explain the stop, refusal to call a supervisor until much later, shifting reasons once a sergeant arrived, then the videos, then the photos, then the marks from the cuffs. When a case is bad, people usually feel it. When a case is dangerous, people can document it. Mercer had both. The FBI treated it seriously from the start. They had to. This wasn't just a rough traffic stop. A local patrol officer had detained an undercover federal asset after seeing federal credentials, searched the vehicle anyway, handled a federally authorized weapon, and came close to accessing sensitive work material. That gets attention fast. Mercer also contacted a civil rights attorney. Her name was Rachel Kim. She reviewed the stop, the body cam issue, the witness footage, and the timing. Her reaction was simple. This had gone far enough to justify immediate federal action if the department started stonewalling or retaliating. That same day, the videos started moving. One clip showed Boone ordering Mercer out after looking at the credentials. Another showed Mercer staying calm while Boone kept escalating. Another showed the release after the supervisor's call. The clip spread across TikTok, Instagram, and X before the department had its story straight. That mattered because once the public sees the scene before the agency writes the report, the usual cleanup gets harder. People were already asking the obvious questions. Why detain him after seeing the credentials? Why search the vehicle? Why did the reason for the stop change? Why did it take a supervisor's phone call to do what should have happened at minute 5? By the afternoon, local media had picked it up. Then bigger outlets followed. Mercer's name wasn't pushed into the story the way a normal victim's would be because of the federal angle and the sensitivity around his work, but the facts were bad enough on their own. A driver with federal identification had been cuffed, searched, and held while the officer's explanation shifted on camera. The department put out the usual statement. They said they were aware of the incident. They said they were reviewing it. They said they took allegations seriously. That language always shows up when an agency wants time more than truth. Rachel Kim didn't wait around for the department to get comfortable. She moved before they could settle into delay mode. Her first step was evidence preservation. She sent formal notice demanding that the department preserve body cam, footage, dash cam footage, dispatch audio, CAD logs, GPS records, internal messages, search records, and every report tied to the stop. That's how serious lawyers work these cases. They don't start with outrage. They start by cutting off the escape routes. No missing video, no edited timeline, no claim later that something was automatically deleted. Then she started building the federal complaint. Not vague language, specific claims, unlawful detention, unreasonable search, retaliatory escalation after presentation of federal credentials, interference with a federally connected operation, potential exposure of sensitive material, failure to timely verify identity after being given the means to do it. She also focused on Boone's changing explanations because that's the kind of thing judges notice immediately. A stop with one clear basis is one thing. A stop with one reason, then another. Then a claim of aggression contradicted by video looks like post hoc justification. And courts don't like that game. The department could feel the pressure building inside the building before any injunction landed. Internal Affairs opened its review. Boone was told to prepare a statement. That's usually where officers try to line up the language. Mercer was evasive. Mercer was aggressive. Mercer created officer safety concerns. The problem this time was that the footage existed outside the department too. Witnesses had angles the body cam didn't. Once that happens, the report can't just be written for the file. It has to survive comparison. Boone was boxed in by his own choices. The sergeant, Lena Ortiz, now had a problem of her own. She hadn't started the stop, but she had arrived in the middle of it and inherited the mess. Her phone call had ended the detention, which helped Mercer, but it also showed something ugly about the department. Verification had always been available. Boone just didn't want to slow down enough to use it. That issue started climbing the chain fast. Command staff didn't just have a patrol problem anymore. They had a supervision problem. They had a training problem. And because the detainee was tied to federal work, they now had a federal court problem too. Kim filed for emergency relief before the department could settle into a defensive pattern. That was the turning point in the legal side. She argued that the court needed to step in quickly. Because this was not just about damages later. It was about immediate protection of evidence, protection against retaliation, and protection against further interference with Mercer or material connected to his federal work. She asked for orders preventing destruction of records, restricting direct contact or retaliation by involved personnel, and forcing the department to preserve and identify all evidence tied to the stop. That filing changed the whole atmosphere. A lawsuit is one thing, emergency federal court attention is another. Agencies can drag their feet on complaints. They get very alert when a judge starts asking questions. Boone probably still thought this was about whether the stop looked bad. He was behind. The issue had already moved past optics. Now it was about whether his actions had crossed into a constitutional violation with federal consequences attached. Once that happens, the badge doesn't protect the officer the way he thought it would. The department's legal team had to respond fast. They reviewed the footage. They reviewed dispatch. They reviewed the stop report. That's when the mismatch became impossible to ignore. Boone's first reason didn't hold. The second reason looked weak. The aggression claim didn't fit the video. Mercer's requests for a supervisor were there. His refusal to consent to the search was there too. This wasn't a close case. That's the problem with body cams when the officer forgets they're not just for his side. They record the parts he wishes were never said. Inside the department, people started reacting the way they always do when they realize federal court may get there before internal review does. Some wanted Boone cut loose immediately. Some wanted to call it a bad stop and contain it. Some were more worried about the federal relationship than the stop itself. That happens a lot too. Departments can ignore regular people for years and suddenly become very respectful when another badge is involved. It's ugly, but it's real. Mercer didn't care about their panic. He cared about the record. He and Kim kept tightening the case. Witness videos were logged. Photos were dated. Names were confirmed. Public statements from the department were compared against what the footage actually showed. Every hour that passed made it harder for the agency to pretend the stop had just gotten messy by accident. Boone had seen the credentials. He had time to verify. He kept pushing. That was the core fact, and it kept surviving every review. Then word came back that the federal court was taking the emergency request seriously. The federal court didn't wait long. That's what really shook the department. Not the social media clips, not the news coverage, not the angry calls. The court moved. Once Rachel Kim's emergency filing landed with the videos, the photos, the report issues, and the federal connection, the department lost the luxury of dragging this out internally. A judge ordered immediate preservation of all evidence tied to the stop and put restrictions in place to prevent interference or retaliation while the case moved forward. That injunction changed everything inside the building. It told command staff this was no longer a public relations issue. It was now a federal court matter with direct oversight. The department reacted the only way it could. Fast. Aaron Boone was pulled from patrol almost immediately. His weapon and department vehicle were taken pending review. He was placed on administrative status, while internal affairs and department lawyers tried to get in front of the collapse. The backup officer was also removed from regular field duty, while his role in the search was reviewed. Sergeant Lena Ortiz stayed on paper, but her handling of the stop, especially the delay before intervention, was folded into a supervisory review. The department didn't call it a shakeup in public at first. That's exactly what it was. Schedules changed. Assignments changed. Command meetings stacked up. People who had ignored warning signs before were suddenly forced to explain what training had actually been given and what discipline had not been used. That federal injunction also forced another ugly question into the open. What if Mercer hadn't been tied to federal work? What if he had just been another driver with no leverage, no federal chain behind him, no attorney moving this fast, and no witnesses willing to preserve the footage? That question hung over the whole case because everyone knew the answer. The stop might have been buried as a routine detention. Boone might have written the report his way, and walked it through review like nothing serious had happened. The video stopped that. The court stopped that. Mercer's discipline stopped that. But the real problem was that the department had systems that still allowed officers to think they could get away with this in the first place. Internal affairs started going through Boone's record. That part mattered more than the department wanted to admit. Once an officer is caught in a high-profile stop like this, investigators stop looking only at the one incident. They start asking whether this was the first time or just the first time the footage got too strong to ignore. Boone's prior complaints came back into focus. So did his use of force history. So did prior allegations involving black male drivers. Those complaints had not led to serious consequences before. Now they were being read in a different light, not as isolated friction, as warning signs the department had chosen to live with. That's how departments create their own scandals, not only through one officer's ego. Through years of low-grade tolerance, the legal pressure kept building. Kim didn't let the injunction become symbolic. She used it as leverage. Every preserved record mattered now. Dispatch logs, body cam timing, supervisor contact delay, search sequence, stop report language. Once the paperwork was compared against the footage, Boone's position got worse. His claimed reasons for the stop didn't line up cleanly. His description of Mercer's behavior looked weaker every time the videos were replayed. The department's lawyers understood the danger right away. If this went deeper into the discovery, the case would not stay limited to Boone's decisions on one roadside shoulder. It could spread into training failures, complaint handling, and command knowledge. That's the kind of case city attorneys hate, because it turns one ugly event into a map of the whole system. Mercer stayed quiet in public. Smart move. He let the evidence do the talking. That usually lands harder than speeches. He had already done the important part. He had stayed calm during the stop. He had documented the damage right after. He had moved fast the next morning. He had not given Boone any noise to hide behind. So when the department started trying to soften its language, the record kept beating them back. The department finally made a stronger public move once it became clear the federal court was not going to let this drift. Boone was suspended pending final disposition. The backup officer was reassigned. A command-level review was announced into traffic stop practices, search authority, identity verification procedures, and handling of interactions involving outside agencies or federal personnel. That sounds technical. It was really an admission that the department had a patrol culture problem and had been forced to face it all at once. Then came the part that really stung. Outside review. Once a department loses trust in its own process, or looks like it has, outside oversight starts getting more support. City officials wanted distance. Federal officials wanted reliability. Community leaders wanted proof that this wasn't going to be handled with one quiet suspension and a memo nobody read. The department had to open itself up more than it wanted. That meant more scrutiny on training files, more scrutiny on complaint histories, and more scrutiny on how officers were taught to respond when a stop stops making sense. Boone's detention of Mercer had forced the agency into a position it never wanted to be in, explaining its habits under pressure instead of hiding them inside policy language. For Boone, the career damage was already done. Even before the final outcome, he had become the face of a case no department wants attached to its patch. A patrol officer sees federal credentials and escalates anyway. He searches anyway. He cuffs anyway. Then he changes the reason for the stop once a supervisor shows up. That combination is poison in court and poison inside a command staff meeting. Officers can survive mistakes. They usually don't survive footage that makes the mistake look stubborn. Boone hadn't just made a bad call. He had kept making worse ones after he had chances to stop. That's what ended him. Mercer's side got what mattered most first: protection of the record, protection against quiet retaliation, immediate court attention. After that came the broader consequences. Policy changes were pushed. Verification procedures were tightened. Supervisors were told to respond faster in disputed stops involving claimed official credentials. Training blocks were revised around search limits, detention thresholds, and roadside escalation. Departments love acting like reform takes years. Funny how quickly changes appear when a federal judge is watching. And Mercer? He got something more important than a speech from the chief or some carefully worded apology. He got the truth locked into the record before the department could smother it. That matters. A lot. Because dignity means very little if the paperwork says the officer was right and the video disappears. Mercer made sure that didn't happen. That's the lesson in this case. Boone thought
Step aside.
You have my judicial credential.
Doesn't look right.
Then verify it
Where'd you get this?
from the United States government. I'm Naomi Carter, federal district judge. You can confirm me with Chambers, the clerk's office, or the Marshal Service.
I'm handling it.
No, you're delaying a sitting judge from entering the courthouse.
Not coming.
This security officer thought he controlled the courthouse entrance. Then he decided a black federal judge's credentials had to be fake and turned a routine morning into a career-ending incident. He blocked her from entering her own building, ignored the ID in his hand, and kept pushing even after staff recognized her. The cameras were on. Witnesses were everywhere. And he was about to learn that ego doesn't outrank the federal bench. Tell me where you're watching from, and if you follow stories about abuse of authority, bodycam evidence, and people getting exposed in real time. Like the video and subscribe, the judge's name was Naomi Carter. She was a sitting federal district judge in her early 50s. Former prosecutor, former appellate lawyer, known for being direct, prepared, and hard to shake. She wasn't dramatic. She didn't need to be. That morning, she arrived just before first calendar. She had a briefcase, a robe bag, and a stack of notes for the hearings waiting upstairs. The lobby was busy. Lawyers were moving through screening. Clerks were coming in fast. Families were waiting near the benches. It was a normal federal courthouse morning. At the checkpoint stood Officer Brett Harlan. Courthouse security? Mid-30s? The kind of guy who had gotten too comfortable making snap judgments and calling it procedure. Judge Carter handed him her federal judicial credential. He looked at it, looked at her, then told her to step aside. She identified herself and told him he could verify her with Chambers, the clerk's office, or the deputy marshals. Easy fix. 30 seconds, maybe less. He didn't verify anything. He said the credential didn't look right. Then he asked where she got it. That question changed the whole tone. He wasn't checking a document. He was treating her like a suspect. Judge Carter stayed calm. She told him again who she was and said he was delaying a sitting federal judge from entering the courthouse. She asked him to call the Marshal's service. He moved in front of the lane and blocked her path. That was the moment this stopped being a mistake. A few people nearby had already noticed. One attorney recognized her immediately. A clerk from inside the lobby looked over and froze. They knew exactly who she was. Harlan kept going anyway. She asked for his supervisor. He said he was handling it. Bad answer. That's what people say when they know someone above them would shut it down. A court employee named Evan Price, her courtroom clerk, stepped towards the checkpoint and identified her by name and title. He told Harlan she was expected upstairs and needed to get through. Harlan told him to stay back, said he wasn't taking anyone's word for it. Now he was ignoring the credential and staff confirmation at the same time. Judge Carter gave him another chance. She told him to contact the deputy marshals and clear it up properly. Instead, he looked at the badge again and said that anybody could wear a suit and carry a fake ID. That line landed hard. It was public. It was recorded. And it told everyone in the lobby what this really was. Not caution, not confusion. Bias mixed with authority. Judge Carter didn't argue with him. She switched gears. She asked for his name, his badge number, and whether his camera was recording. Then she stated clearly and slowly that she had presented valid judicial identification and was being denied entry without verification. She was no longer trying to convince him. She was building the record. Harlan still didn't back off. He reached for his radio. And that made the situation worse, not better. When Harlan called for assistance, he didn't say he was holding a federal judge with valid credentials. He framed it as a problem at the checkpoint. That's how bad officers buy time. They shape the story before anyone else gets there. Judge Carter caught it right away. She asked him what he had just reported. He ignored the question. By then, more people in the lobby were watching. A lawyer near the X-ray belt had stopped pretending to check his phone. A staff member near the elevators had already messaged upstairs. Evan Price stayed close enough to hear, far enough not to give Harlan an excuse to escalate. Judge Carter kept it simple. She said her name again, stated her title, said her hearings were about to begin, said he had refused to verify her identity through normal courthouse channels. Harlan asked for a second photo ID. She told him the judicial credential in his hand was the official ID for courthouse access. He then asked why she wasn't using a private entrance. That exposed another problem. He didn't even know the building routines well enough to fake confidence. Judges use different entry points depending on timing, security flow, and schedule. Staff in the lobby knew that. He clearly didn't. 2 more security officers arrived from inside. Harlan started talking first, fast. He described the credential as suspicious and said the woman at the checkpoint was refusing to cooperate. That version didn't hold up for long. One of the responding officers looked at Judge Carter, then at Evan Price, then back at Harlan. You could see the doubt immediately. The room already knew more than Harlan's report allowed. Judge Carter didn't waste words. She said she had shown official identification, asked for verification, and been blocked anyway. Then she asked Harlan one direct question. Was he claiming the court's own judicial credential was invalid? Or was he refusing to accept it based on his own judgment? He didn't answer directly. He said he was following his instincts. That told the whole story, not policy, not a system check. Instincts. Harlan then told her she would not enter the building until he was satisfied. That was the worst line yet. He had just turned courthouse access into a personal decision, not based on rules, based on him. The people around them heard it too. A few faces changed right there. This wasn't going to stay inside the lobby. Too many witnesses, too many court employees, too much recording. Judge Carter responded the way experienced judges do when someone hands them a clean record of misconduct. She stayed controlled. She asked him to repeat that statement. He refused. So she repeated it herself, out loud, so the camera in the room would catch it. Then she said he was interfering with court operations and delaying a sitting federal judge without lawful cause. That was the first moment Harlan looked uncertain. Not because he suddenly understood the law, because he realized other people were starting to understand what he had done. From the interior corridor, Deputy Marshal Lena Torres came into the lobby. She took one look at Judge Carter and knew exactly what she was seeing. She moved straight to the checkpoint and identified Judge Carter immediately. That should have ended it on the spot. Harlan tried to keep control anyway. He started explaining himself before Torres even asked a question. Another bad sign. Innocent people usually answer. They don't rush to build a defense before the facts are even requested. Torres asked one thing first. Had the judge presented her credential? Yes, that answer boxed him in. Because from there was nowhere to go. He had the ID. He had staff confirmation. He had a clear path to verify it, and he chose not to. Torres told him to step aside. He didn't move right away. And that hesitation in front of a deputy marshal, in front of courthouse staff, in front of witnesses, made everything much worse. Deputy Marshal Lena Torres didn't need a long explanation. She knew Judge Naomi Carter. She worked courthouse security details. She had seen her enter that building many times. Torres asked Harlan if the judge had already shown identification. He said yes. She asked if he had called Chambers, the clerk's office, or the marshal desk to confirm it. He said no, that was enough. Torres told him to move. Harlan started talking over her. He said the credential looked questionable. He said he was being careful. He said he had to trust his instincts. He kept reaching for the same excuse because he didn't have anything else. Torres shut that down fast. She told him this was a federal judge, this was an active courthouse entrance, and he had no basis to keep blocking her after refusing basic verification. Simple, direct, no room left. Judge Carter still didn't make a scene. She stood there, let the facts sit in the air, and watched him try to talk his way out of something the whole lobby had already seen. That was the point where Harlan made the mistake that finished him. Instead of stepping aside immediately, he questioned Torres in front of everyone. He asked how she could be sure. Bad move. Very bad move. Because now he wasn't just challenging Judge Carter. He was challenging a deputy marshal who actually knew the building, knew the credential system, and knew exactly how far he had already crossed the line. Torres answered him the way professionals do when patience is over. She said she was sure because this was Judge Carter, because the credential was valid, and because he had just admitted he never used any of the available ways to confirm it before blocking a sitting federal judge from entering the courthouse. That landed in the lobby like a hammer. At that point, Harlan finally stepped aside. Not because he understood what he'd done, because the room had turned. Too many witnesses, too many staff, too many people who could repeat the same sequence back word for word. His version was dead. Judge Carter didn't rush through the lane. She did something smarter. She paused and asked Torres to confirm on camera that her identification had been valid the entire time. Torres did exactly that. Then Judge Carter asked Evan Price, her clerk, to note the time and delay the calendar until further direction. That detail mattered. This wasn't just personal humiliation anymore. It had disrupted court operations. She then looked at Harlan and gave him one sentence. She said the danger starts when the person guarding the courthouse decides his judgment matters more than the law. That was it. No speech, no shouting, no theatrics, just a clean statement. And it hit harder because she didn't overplay it. Then she went through security and entered the building. The confrontation was over. The real damage was just starting. Within minutes, the story had moved upstairs. Clerks were talking, court staff were talking. Marshals were already pulling checkpoint logs. By the time Judge Carter reached chambers, the chief deputy had been notified. The camera retention request was already being discussed, and the first written statements were being lined up from staff who saw the whole thing. That's how these cases turn. Fast. Once people realize there's a clean record, they stop treating it like a misunderstanding and start treating it like evidence. Harlan tried to protect himself almost immediately. He began explaining the situation to the other security officers before anyone formally questioned him. Another bad move. He was too eager. He kept repeating that he was following protocol, but the problem was obvious by then. Protocol would have required verification. He skipped that part, more than once. Worse, he had already said too much on camera. He had admitted he relied on instinct. He had admitted he didn't verify. He had admitted he still blocked entry after staff identification. That's not a paperwork issue. That's a judgment issue. And in a federal courthouse, judgment problems become employment problems very quickly. Later that morning, Judge Carter gave a short, factual account to the chief judge and the head of courthouse security. No embellishment, no anger, just the sequence. Credentials shown, identity stated, verification requested, staff confirmation ignored, entry blocked. Martial intervention required. That kind of statement is dangerous for the other side because it's clean. No exaggeration to attack. No emotion to discredit. Just facts backed by witnesses and video. By lunch, orders had gone out to preserve everything. Lobby surveillance, radio traffic, body camera footage, access logs, incident reports, staff statements. Nothing was getting lost. Nothing was getting quietly rewritten. And Harlan had one more problem. His first verbal explanation to supervisors didn't match what witnesses were already saying. He implied the judge had been confrontational. Witnesses said she was calm. He implied the credentials seemed fake. The marshal said it was standard and immediately recognizable. He implied he was waiting on confirmation. The radio and lobby account showed he never actually requested the right confirmation in the first place. That's when the internal review stopped looking like routine discipline and started looking like a serious misconduct case. Because once the facts are fixed, the motive gets ugly fast. By the end of that day, Brett Harlan was off the entrance post. Not quietly either. Supervisors had already reviewed enough to know this was bigger than a bad interaction. Too many witnesses, too many staff statements, too much camera coverage, and his own words had done a lot of the damage for them. The body camera review was brutal. It showed Judge Naomi Carter presenting valid credentials right away. It showed her giving him normal ways to verify her identity. It showed him ignoring those options. It showed court staff recognizing her. It showed Deputy Marshal Lena Torres confirming her identity immediately. And worst of all for him, it showed that he kept blocking entry after all of that. That killed the confusion defense. Then they pulled the radio traffic. That made it worse. He had called for support without accurately describing the situation. He left out the judge's title, left out the credential, left out the staff confirmation. He framed it like a checkpoint problem instead of telling the truth. That told investigators he wasn't trying to solve the situation. He was trying to control it. Once the footage and radio logs were matched with witness statements, internal affairs moved fast. Harlan was placed on administrative leave first. Then his access to courthouse security systems was suspended. Then came the formal investigation. The question was no longer whether he made a mistake. The question was why he kept going after it was obvious he was wrong. That question got ugly for him fast. Several employees described the same pattern. He was respectful with some people, aggressive with others. More than one person said he had a habit of acting like certain professionals needed to prove they belonged in the building. The review widened. Old complaints came up. Not major headline cases, smaller ones. Dismissive conduct, selective screening, talking down to black attorneys and staff. Things that had been shrugged off before because nobody had forced the institution to look at them side by side. Now they were looking. Judge Carter did not turn it into a media show. She handled it the way judges handle serious misconduct, through record, process, and consequence. She filed a formal complaint through the court's administrative channel. She requested preservation of all footage. She documented the delay to court operations. And she made it clear that this was not about hurt feelings. It was about a courthouse officer deciding he could override law, policy, and official credentials based on his personal judgment. That framing mattered. Because once the issue became institutional, the court had to respond like an institution. The chief judge ordered a review of entry screening practices. The Marshal Service reviewed checkpoint procedures. Security leadership had to explain why a sitting judge could be blocked from entering after presenting valid identification and after being recognized by staff. Nobody had a good answer because there wasn't one. Then the civil side started moving. Attorneys representing Judge Carter sent notice of potential legal claims tied to unlawful detention, public humiliation, interference with official duties, and discriminatory treatment. The courthouse didn't wait for that to explode into a larger public fight. Settlement talks started early, quietly at first, then more seriously once the video had been fully assessed. At the same time, local legal circles already knew the story. Then local media got it. Then it spread wider. The basic facts were too clear to bury. Black federal judge blocked from her own courthouse. Valid credentials dismissed. Deputy marshal forced to intervene. Video preserved. Internal investigation opened. That kind of headline writes itself. Harlan's written report didn't help him. It hurt him. He described the judge as evasive. The footage showed she was clear. He suggested he was waiting on verification. The record showed he refused to use the obvious verification channels. He implied she escalated the scene. The witnesses said he did. Once that report was compared against the video, his credibility collapsed. And once credibility goes, careers usually go with it. A few weeks later, the outcome became official. He was terminated. The stated reasons were straightforward: failure to follow verification procedures, misuse of authority, false and misleading reporting, conduct inconsistent with courthouse security standards. The ugly part sat underneath all of it, even if the paperwork used cleaner language. He had looked at a black woman with federal judicial credentials and decided she didn't fit the role in his head. Then he used his post to act on that assumption. Judge Carter kept working. That's another part people miss in stories like this. The target still has to go back to the same building, same halls, same courtroom, same staff asking whether she's okay. Same place where she was publicly disrespected before work even started. She kept showing up anyway. But the building changed after that. Credential verification rules were tightened. Officers were required to use direct confirmation channels before blocking credentialed court personnel. Bias training was expanded. Escalation policies were rewritten. Supervisors were required to review checkpoint incidents involving court officials the same day. And staff understood something clearly now. The cameras were not just there for defendants and the public. They were there for the people with badges too. That's the part that mattered most. This wasn't a story about one awkward morning at security. It was a story about what happens when a person with a little authority thinks instinct is more important than law. That mindset doesn't just insult people. It disrupts institutions. It damages trust. It turns routine contact into abuse. Harlan thought he was the final word at the entrance. He wasn't. The record was. The witnesses were. The footage was. And once all of that came together, his badge couldn't protect him from the truth he had already put on camera himself. So that's the story. A courthouse officer tried to decide who looked like a federal judge, and that decision ended his career. What would have gone through your mind if you were standing in that lobby watching it happen? Have you ever seen somebody with a little authority